So you see Star Trek Picard. A few years ago, Romulus' sun exploded and the Federation was helping evacuate Romulans. The Federation built fleets of rescue ships to help do this. And during this, the Federation's android, let's be diplomatic about this, the Federation's android unpaid workers killed every non-android life form in the Mars shipyard and then curb-stomped the shipyard with their own ships. You don't know what happened to the ships after. Don't ask. As a result, the Federation outlawed synthetic life and canceled saving the Romulans. In the current setting, Federation citizens believe all androids are murder bots, and they justified the abandonment of the Romulans on the principle that they're enemies of the Federation. As a fairly strict idealist Star Trek fan, I don't have a problem with this idea. I don't like it. I think a society populated by mooing idiots motivated by fear couldn't create the society that we see in Star Trek. I think that the future populated by inquisitive, intelligent, educated people would ask more questions about the Mars attacks than none. And I know that because this is Star Trek Picard, there's a tendency to attribute things to hyperbole. But I want to be clear, no questions were asked about the Mars attacks. I have the rest of my life to cover the plot holes in Star Trek Picard, which has more plot holes than there are seconds left in my life. So we will focus on the topic at hand. My belief in Federation Society, well, Federation Society, as a society of intelligent, educated people who possess the wherewithal to be aware of the universe around them, doesn't mean that the Federation doesn't make mistakes or that they couldn't make this mistake. In fact, when you look at the Federation, the scope of the bad decisions, I don't know if I thought this one out. The scope of the bad decisions becomes greater as we move further forward in time. Descent, Part 1, 1993. Admiral Netraya tells Picard to commit genocide against the Borg. This is before we learn that giving Hugh individuality seems to have actually destroyed the Borg collective without destroying the Borg themselves. Picard should have kicked back harder on this, but given that he was right up until the Borg collective was retconned back into existence in 1996's feature film First Contact, there wasn't much of a riposte necessary. In the Pale Moonlight, 1998, Starfleet authorizes a forgery to get the Romulans into the Dominion War on false pretenses. Unacceptable. But, ultimately, the triple bacon homicide part of the plot was the result of letting their intelligence op get infected with a bad case of Garrick. I loathe this episode. What am I going to do here? Oh. I need a little, like, foyer there. That's the pattern. So as it goes to the 3-block wall, it's a 1-block wide corridor, but there's a part where it's 3 blocks wide in the middle of the wall. I'm going to try to just do that. I'm going to try to just put wood over it instead of having the glass flex out. Because the glass is where the foyer needs to be. A better design would have simply had traveled through the thick of these wooden beams. And therefore, evaded the question entirely. But, fuck that up. So there we are. This is, by the way, Morning Perfect Base. I'm going to work my perfect base a little bit at certain intervals, and then occasionally I'm going to put them all together into a big video. Whatever, talking about Star Trek. But at least Sisko does, and I feel bad about this dance at the end. I mean, he suffers 0 consequences, and whether it's the right thing to do is at least talked about, however rotely, Insurrection, 1998, same year. The Federation Council signs off on the forced relocation. That looks okay. Not great, but it looks okay. Of a non-Federation society in exchange for age-reducing microbead energy. Babylon 5 did it better, honestly. So when Riker tells the Federation Council just how fuckable the Baku are, in a way we assume only Riker could, they instantly relent. Picard yells at an admiral and is shocked that the council would agree to this, but once the current crisis is past, everyone's too busy patting each other on the back and scheduling fuck-down sessions with the Baku to address the obvious systemic flaws at play. Author, 2001. Voyager episodes. The holograms are fucking slaves, man. Ostensibly used by average Federation citizens because what the hell, you monsters? Even Bruce Maddox, right, when he was confronted with the logical end result of his plans for Data, a race held in thrall to Federation citizens, he relented because slavery is wrong. My point isn't that the Federation is good or evil or must be good or evil, or that the Federation presented in Picard differs from that previously shown in Star Trek. It's actually completely in line with these lazy shit ideas by hack writers that the Federation would be filled with lazy xenophobes boasting the parenting sensibilities of Victor fucking Frankenstein. 2 questions should be asked of Star Trek. 1. Given that our heroes can be flawed and they can disagree on how to solve problems, should their society always be right? 2. Is that society, it's a separate issue, America in space? Given that Kirk and crew literally celebrate Thanksgiving with turkeys in the first half dozen episodes of the original series, the answer to number 2 seems to frequently be yes, which means the answer to question number 1 has to reasonably be no. When DS9 does this, right, it says, yeah, it's America, but it's flawed. They are using that generally to criticize the U.S. With some fairly salient social commentary. DS9's most highly regarded scene is one in which citizens of second-rate powers on the eve of galactic war privately confide in one another that despite their rehearsed skepticism of the Federation, they know that deep down, the Federation is the good guys and will save the known galaxy. This goes against that salient social commentary thing above, because this is clearly a yes characterization of the Federation. It's the Quark and Garrick bar scene in the Season 4 opener, Way of the Warrior. It's one of the greatest scenes in the show, and it exemplifies the pro-American bent of the American writers of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Skipping over that whole essay, though, DS9 does offer knowing, almost prescient criticisms of American culture, but in making the good guys equal to the United States, as they often do, they also declare the United States as systemically good and ingrain its real systemic flaws into the Federation as rare but inevitable failures. They also engage in military jerk-off sessions that would get a blush out of Michael fucking Bay, but I digress here. Boy, this doesn't look inspiring, I'll admit, guys. Looks a little untextured. I'm not happy with those logs either. That should be glass. Early TNG and a lot of TOS tried to answer number 2 as no, which puts answer 1 back into play. If the Federation is a society that is not America, but it's flawed, then it would just be some government in space, based on America, implicitly, but without Thanksgiving. If it isn't America, and it isn't systemically flawed, then we're suddenly, finally, somewhere interesting. Somewhere I'd rather be. But let's not talk about what I want. Let's talk about what is. It is America in space. As time goes on from the start of TNG, Deep Space Nine and the rest of Trek just use American cultural assumptions to fill in the blanks for the Federation. We have a lot of well-developed societies in the TNG era, but because we refuse to define Federation culture, media, and politics, their culture, media, and politics are implicitly filled with American assumptions. And the problem with that is that when our main characters aren't just good people, and aren't just people of good character, but people who see things that are wrong and make them right. As you know, heroes, and as heroes we expect them, when they happen upon a systemically flawed society, to actually fix it. And you may remember this from such classics as all of my Picard videos. Just bear with me. It is a straight up contradiction that when we learn Section 31 exists, that Ben Sisko and crew just file a report about it instead of figuratively moving the literal heavens and literal earth to find and destroy Section 31. They just shrug. And they say, I guess we were never any different from the Romulan Star Empire, the Cardassian Union, or the Third fucking Reich. And that's kind of my thing with Picard's portrayal of the Federation. It's not that the Federation shouldn't be xenophobic slavers. It's that the idea is unchallenged throughout. Yes, it's unchallenged. Picard proves the data upon which the synthetic ban is based, the literal collection of information, not the guide data. And so the ban is overturned. Thus, the Federation is then freed to rebuild their fleet of sub-sentient slave intelligences because it's no longer posing a personal danger to them? Quick question. What kind of mental deformities can we genetically inject into fetuses so that they can be born to caring mothers and then serve as a set of quiescent living tools for Buick production, asking for a friend? And we never rebut the xenophobia against Romulans either. Even in the poorly defined decline of their society, they are capable of infiltrating the highest levels of Starfleet undetected, killing thousands of Federation citizens while we're trying to save them, and they still assemble a fleet commanded by a religious fanatic that goes toe-to-toe with Starfleet. I was 0% down with letting Romulans die at the start of this series, but by the end I was willing to entertain arguments on the issue. We're still not moving heaven and earth to address the wrongs. We're not driven by principles. We are trying to save a woman who is the daughter of our friend. A friend who Picard suddenly loves so deeply that the show's most progressive characteristic is that it didn't stop to drop a no homo on us. We're just yelling at admirals and not challenging the system at work because the system at work is just a given that we're not supposed to question. The archetypical Star Trek episode is, the Enterprise goes to a planet with a society built around a very reasonable value. The society has a horrible secret which derives from that reasonable value. The Enterprise crew learns the secret and is endangered, physically or morally, by it. In saving themselves, the captain distills the competing values at play for the folks at home and probably disrupts the status quo of that society. Roll credits while Geordi and Data play the theme on kazoo. That is very outward-facing. Our crew are coldly dispassionate while observing from their high-orbit white horses. Well, PS-57 Pearl White horses. Our heroes are generally, but not necessarily, right. In Private Little War, Kirk gives weapons to primitive peoples as a least bad option that justified U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Vietnam War stands. Please interact. At this point, I have to point out that I talk about all of this in 17 to 1 and The Beige and the Bold and 9 Deeps of Space, which are podcasts I make for the original series, The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine, respectively. And listening to over 200 episodes of my podcast feels like it would somehow be shorter than reading all of this. The Voyager episode, Drive, is a great example as Tom Paris and B'Elanna Torres debate who is taking whose last name. And they observe incredibly contemporary just married traditions, and we're still calling Janeway ma'am instead of the gender neutral in a way that admittedly is not all that gender neutral, sir. DS9's whole ass premise is the Federation as America with hashtag freedom dipshits in the Maquis. It sees Earth as a gated community, Federation's xenophobia against Ferengi, a world war where everyone stops just long enough to suck off the US for being the best band of bastards fighting the war on their limp-wristed European behalfs, and Starfleet principles as a combination of marketing and propaganda, or maybe some kind of signal to others of Starfleet's moral positivity or holy virtues. But given the number of presumably spineless, mealy-mouthed people who incessantly whine about the TNG crew being baffled and disgusted by self-destructive, arrogantly short-sighted 20th century assholes in the neutral zone, Claire was okay. There are some people who are just angry at protagonists, who can make value judgments, and who have the audacity to make decisions instead of interminably hand-wringing. It works in the same principle as Marvel movies. We don't question the status quo because the villains are the ones questioning the status quo, and they seem like jerks and are universally conveniently too insane to negotiate with, so let's just punch them. We're told 14 planets would have left the Federation if we'd saved Romulus. Well, who were they? What's their story? They might have a really clever insight, or a culture with a weird set of values, or some alternative perspective on this. But now we just fold. They're just something to leverage us, to give us some sort of political reason we can't just do the right thing. Picard, and much of Latter-day Trek, I don't watch Disco, so maybe not Disco, wants to examine the Federation, but it's not smart enough to create the Federation. They can't create a version of the Federation that works as a better society, but they can question that a better society works. Without the creation of the idea, they're just questioning the vague concept of society being better right now. They can only ask, how can a society be better than modern societies when all societies have to look like modern societies, or older, presumably more flawed society? And a more aware person might be a little more embarrassed to reveal their lack of vision. So it's not that Picard's portrayal of the Federation wasn't consistent with previous iterations, or that the Federation is not allowed to be certain things. It's that the idea was a big one that went to the heart of the Federation and demanded a story that went to the heart of the Federation. It's that any flawed society could have been at the center of our story, but we made that society, the Federation, for a little additional emotional resonance, but sacrificed the ability to make real systemic change. It's that it cements the Federation as a society that isn't philosophically different from the United States of today. It just has free energy and free crap and conflicts between people and governments and centers of power that fail to materialize, mostly because no one thinks to be malicious, for the same reason no one tries to address real problems. Sheer complacent lack of imagination. And that's my core problem with Star Trek Picard. That and the writing and the acting, and to some extent the special effects, the dialogue. But that most of the imagination thing. Anyway, keep asking questions, keep making good art, and keep learning.